Hey everyone, and welcome to the Earthbane panel. The Earthbane panel, that's right. Earthbane, it might be a new word to some of you, but by the end of this panel, it'll be old and crusty like all of us. And in that time, we will hopefully explain to you some of what there is to be excited about in
Mhm, mhm.
Earthbane. I will introduce the panelists or allow them to introduce themselves. I will start with myself, rather hubristically. My name is Matthew Dawkins. I oversee Earthbane as a game line. It is part of the StoryPath Ultra game line. Game lines, I should say, uses that system, and is Onyx Path's fantasy offering of the now. I developed the world below, and I will be developing the upcoming Monster Kingdoms as well. But when we talk about development, there's another very big game in the Earthbane cycle that has just concluded its crowdfunding campaign, developed by Danielle Lozon.
Hello, I'm Danielle Lozon. I am the developer for At the Gates, which is the very big game that Matthew was just talking about. And yeah, I have been, man, I pitched that game like back in, was it 2020,
It
Rich?
was a PAX Unplugged, maybe the first one. I
Yeah, I think it was.
remember walking through
Yeah,
those hallways with you talking about it.
yep. I was like, hey, let's do a fantasy game. And you're like, yeah, sounds interesting. Send me a pitch. And I wrote up a pitch and I sent it in. And then the pandemic hit and I did literally nothing uh, for many years. And then eventually my brain allowed me to start working on it again. By then, Matthew had already pitched a bunch of bullshit. So it got sucked into the Earthbane Cycle.
So you had
Whoa!
pitched your thing. I had three separate fantasy things, which we've only just touched on the one
Yes.
that we just announced, Monster Kingdoms. Matthew then pitched the world below, which I think grew out of a
A
sketch you guys did
Pathcast.
on a Pathcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the world below
Started there.
was a Pathcast brainstorm
Yeah.
Brain.
game that I pitched. Yeah.
A
So now I
brainstorm.
have a pitch from Danielle, I have a pitch from Matthew. I have these other games that we've been tinkering with,
Hmm.
and the idea was, let's go all in for fantasy, and at the same time, StoryPath Ultra was being discussed. Like, how do we do these things with StoryPath? We're trying some things in StoryPath already with that use magical fantasy story elements, but
Right.
not yet anything that's really solid. So all that was kind of coming together in a big pot, just a big
Hmm.
cauldron, a fantasy cauldron
A
of
fantasy cauldron.
all different
Well,
pieces of dragon's eyes and
Rich, I
tail
think
of newt.
Tale of Newt.
without formal introduction, you have introduced yourself and some of your meandering fantasy thoughts, but this does leave one other panelist, a very important cog in our
Yes.
overall Earthbane machine, and that is Michele
Absolutely.
Masala. Michele,
Yes.
why don't you tell the viewers and listeners what it is you contributed to Earthbane so far?
Hello everyone, I'm Michele Masala, and so far I work on the world below and I wrote the story guide chapter and the antagonist chapter. And for At the Gates, I also wrote the antagonist chapter there. So up until now, I'm telling you how to make stories and which critters to put inside of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really can't
Important
be
part.
undersold how important to these fantasy games, and I don't just mean Earthbane fantasy games, I mean fantasy games in general, having a
Yes.
colorful array of villains can be. Obviously, not
Yes.
every single villain is black and white, nasty. They should have shades of grey. But having some that are absolutely abominable, terrifying, and
Inhuman.
monstrous is something I
Hmm.
remember Michele and I discussing. We even did a stream, didn't we, where you were talking about how using the StoryPath Ultra system, you would be able to basically make any Dark Souls
Yes,
villain for the world below.
I think that my aspiration was for Dark Fantasy to do the system to do all the Soulsborne and associated Berserk and Claymore stuff for the world below. And I think that I did the same, but flavored for JRPGs for At the Gate. So I think I can pull off plenty of the Final Fantasy and all the like creatures for from at the gates. I think we made that work as planned.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what we will do on this panel is we'll go through what some of these games are, from I guess synopsis through to a little bit of a deep dive where necessary, and we'll talk about the upcoming Monster Kingdoms as well. I'll mention, Michele, Tom Murr in the chat has asked if your volume can be increased, so give that a go while I'm rambling on.
Okay.
And if it is at all possible. But I suppose it makes sense to start at the start, and that would be the world below, because we did the crowdfunding for that last year. It busted through any perceived targets that we might have had. It hit double funding, hit 1,000 backers. That is something we are always incredibly happy when it does. But the game itself is subterranean fantasy, has a strong air of survival, a strong air of base building, a strong air of exploration, and a modicum of hope. But that is all, of course, balanced out by unmitigated horror, the world itself wanting to consume you, and its inhabitants rejecting your very existence. Now, that's a fairly strong brew, and it means that the world below has quite an intense flavor to it. Your characters are survivors, or the descendants of survivors, of some kind of surface-born cataclysm long in your history. And you are essentially not just tasked with, but obliged to harvest resources, map the world below, find secrets as to the means of survival and perhaps what happened to the world above, find lost settlements, lost people, connect between your settlements, and of course build your own. Which the game supports with its own winter phase of a sort, if you're familiar with Pendragon. In our game, it's called Calm. Calm with a K, to offset the chaos with a K that rages during that period. And I know, Danielle, you've remarked before that that's your favorite part of the game. You love the idea of base building. Maybe, and I know it's effectively my game, maybe you could talk about what Calm entails.
So when, and I don't know like how do I say, when your people are in the like either, and really this is kind of like, we are done adventuring, now it's time for a calm phase, here is a cycle of calm, not calm, not calm, not calm. But really it represents this kind of like battening down the hatches and building your settlement and making sure that your settlement can weather any of the kind of bad chaos things that happen throughout the world below. And so when you're in a calm phase, you are quite literally spending your time building your community, building your defenses, building your everything that you would need in your community to survive. And so there's a lot of the rules are about taking ability, like taking things in a more abstract way, and hunting and making sure everybody has enough food, or doing entertaining things so that people don't despair, or anything like along those lines are proper activities. And then of course there are things that can come up during your calm phase that are problems, like disputes between people within the settlement, or other weird things that may occur because it's a bunch of people who only kind of get along together, stuck in the same place until whatever chaos bullshit is going on has passed over them.
Yeah. No, I think that is a fantastic summary, Danielle. Thank you for that.
I think the system allows you to also play through that role play as much as you want to role play that. You could drop it down to a series of jump cuts of, and then we're building up this wall, and then this thing, oh no,
Yeah,
then
this is a game with
the teeth came through the
tables.
thing. Or you could just basically go, hey, abstractly, what goes on? What did you put towards it? What do we have here? Boom, boom, boom. Okay, your settlement is this much better or this much worse.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my
A lot of
local
room in there.
groups.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my local groups that's playing with the manuscripts that we released with the Backer Kit campaign is spending more time in that settlement building. Essentially turned the world below into more of a political game of brinkmanship, I suppose. What guild is going to lead the settlements? What religion is ascendant right now? That kind of thing. And the
I like
chaos that is brewing around them is an
Right.
ever-present threat, of course. But they aren't necessarily going to be playing the characters who are always ranging out to deal with it. There are other characters there that they want to recruit, they want to train, that sort of thing.
Oh,
And
that's
as
so cool.
yeah,
These
and I
are
think
our agents. They work for
yes,
us.
and that
Not
plays
you.
into the generational idea that the world below has, that eventually your characters will age out of adventure and you will need to raise, whether it's biological children, adoptive
Mhm.
people, survivors from other colonies, to become your heroes.
Right.
And then you can tell new stories. But as we mentioned before, Michele, of course, you were deeply involved in coming up with why the world below is so horrible.
Well,
Trying
yes.
to live in it.
I-
Could you tell the viewers and listeners the kinds of things that are trying to make their lives an unbearable hell?
Yes. I was asked to do Dark Fantasy and allowed to remove any power blockers from that. And so I tapped into. I think that there's a vast array of issues from in the world below that come from the environment itself, because it's an environment not meant to sustain life, as in life from for the people that ventured in the world below, or more humanoid people that live down there. It's a place meant to sustain life for creatures of the underground,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
people are not by default. They are becoming, and they are sort of becoming part of the world below, but the place is still hostile to begin with. Then you add into that all the the native beasts of the world below, all the array of insects and all that. You have an element of body horror, of course, because I happen to have some phobias of fungi and insects and parasites, and there's plenty of that in the
Yeah,
world
for
below.
someone afraid of those things, you put a lot of them in the game. So I
It's
hope
a
that
process,
helps.
Matthew. You don't have to understand it.
We're here to help.
Okay.
It's a process. You don't have to understand it.
No.
I love
It
that.
does. As Michael Caine told to Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins, because he's afraid of bats. So that's all the whole point of it.
You are
Well,
afraid of bats, Master
yeah.
Bruce. Stop being such a twat.
I mentioned Michael Caine summoning a Matthew impression, and that didn't fail.
You did that very well. Thank you. I love this. I love this,
you,
Michael Caine.
you are a bloody tit, Master Bruce.
And then there's element of summon death taken from Hollow Knight and the Soulsborne games, of course.
Oh yeah.
Because there's plenty of undeath in that sense. There's evil sorcerers, overlords, and Matthew even told me, probably making a mistake, that I could go into eldritch directions in there, and nobody ever gave me that opportunity. But I'm very, very much of a big fan of that sort of stuff. So I also put some of that in there. So you have problems that attack your body, that attack your mind, that attack your soul. And then at the gates, I made even some cute things. But okay. And there's
Well,
dragons in both.
Yes, we'll get into your cuteness and horrors in At the Gates in a moment. One of the last things I want to talk about with The World Below, which of course is still orderable on BackerKit. You can go on backerkit.com right now, look up The World Below, and you can place a pre-order for it either in print, on PDF. We have lots of apparel that goes with it. Is on the subject of monsters. This is a game that is in many ways defined visually by its monsters, I would say, and that's in large part due to the fantastic works of man among us today, Mr. Rich Thomas, who rendered so many of Michele's and Ed Greenwood's creations for our bestiary and some of the features of The World Below. Rich, could you tell us at all about that and how they inspired you, what they inspired you to create?
Oh, they were wonderfully evocative descriptions. I just basically went through, picked about 31 different monsters from the, like, I thought, wow, this is a lot of monsters for this book. This is great. And just kind of went through and picked things in there. Did a little bit of world building with some of the creatures and such. You know, what kind of civilizations they had by what they were wearing, and going into it and trying to find a different take on it that's not necessarily Western / Lord of the Rings / D&D fantasy. Because I thought this thing really was a lot more found objects and natural objects turned into things, as well as the various forged things that you can do there. But it just giving it a different feel overall than what we were used to. And I mean, I just the variety of them. I know that we've talked about. We've got some insects, so we got some
Some blood-sucking
fungi
part
and
arachnids,
molds and spiders, and then vampire, half spider creatures, and just fantastic. So much to play with there that it was a joy. And then just
thank you.
The overall, then looking at that, seeing how we could play around with some of the more ultraviolet lights, and have some art that played around with that, because it's underground. There are going to be weird lighting, cavernous things with crystals and this and that,
fungi,
and phosphorescent fungi, phosphorescent mold, glowing this, glowing that. So we really played around with a whole bunch of those things to come up with a different look for The World Below than really anything we'd done before. And then I think it was just a nice combination. Anybody who's involved with the crowdfunder and who has seen some of that stuff, of being able to go into a few things. I never intended to do that, but when I did the drawings, they were bold enough that we could go in and actually put those funky colors in there, and that day glow kind of thing that the blacklight era that I grew up in was so evocative.
I'll finish up our talk on The World Below for now, but other than for Q&A, by just saying a couple of things. One, the thing I love the most about the Hemexi as antagonists, one of our, I guess, primary monsters, they are, in short, kind of the orcs of The World Below, because you're rarely going to bump into a hunting pack of Hemexi and walk away from that after a nice, pleasant chat.
Not terribly diplomatic, but I think they could be, if they could be overawed.
I'm very glad that those made quite an impression, because they came out of nowhere, and I think people like them a lot. So thank you.
I like them a lot.
They show up in pretty much every adventure I have either played in, witnessed, or ran of The World Below. And a part of that is
vampires.
Is of course, yes, they are vampires, they are bugs, they have a hierarchy. And what I particularly like about their visuals, whether it's in the description Michele and Ed have come up with, or whether it's the descriptions as rendered by Rich, is you can't be certain whether they are spiders, whether they are mosquitoes, whether they're scorpions, or whether they are just very angry crabs. There's something a little, it's uncanny about them. They have this Byzantine almost I remember you gave them kind of Vlad Tepes
Yeah, Eastern
appearances
European
as well.
more than more than Western Europe.
Yeah, the sort of chainmail flanking their faces, the occasional mask, crown, and things like that. And I love that you just can't quite put your finger on what is so unsettling about them, other than the fact they are just freakish and unpleasant.
I mean, if they just been, it's a vampire spider. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, we've seen that in fantasy. We've seen that in D&D plenty of
Right.
times. One of my favorite monsters, were the Drider and things
Mhm.
like that. Nothing scarier than being attacked from the ceiling by something that can run across the ceiling on
yeah.
a bunch of
Mm-mm.
legs while it's still throwing spears and things down at you. So
No, that's too creepy.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about the antagonists, about the world. Last thing I wanted to say was about the fact that you can play. There's multiple callings. We have 5 callings in the game, maybe six callings in the game, I think. We have various dialectics. Dialectics are how you interact with the world and how it changes you. There is this, if for people who are interested in the academic side of things, there is this Hegelian seam that kind of runs through the world below. The idea of every character has a thesis they project onto the world, a synthesis, which is how they interact with the world. And there's the antithesis, which is how everything in the world basically reacts against you and the powers they use against you. So characters are multifaceted, and
did you
the way
say
you
did you say a Hegelian theme or Hegelian seam?
seam, I said a seam.
Yes, I like that the nice metaphor with the
Let's change the manuscript.
underground with the ore seams.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's the world below. You can pre-order it right now, and you can buy the Ash Can on Drive-Thru RPG right now if that interests you. That isn't the only Earthbane game. There is also, as Danielle has mentioned, and I would love Danielle to give a synopsis of what this is all about, At the Gates. So Danielle, take it away.
At the Gates is a wow. I have like an elevator pitch for this, but
Consider it a very tall tower. We're going up the Hancock Tower right now, so you've got a while.
Oh, okay, good. So At the Gates is a game about lots of political stuff going on in the world of people who have
Do you need us to throw you a line?
No, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. They've essentially discovered a new species, or even if you could call it a new group of people. And in that, they have created what's the word? Weapons of destruction from this kind of alien people. So it is fantasy. It's high fantasy. Everybody in the world has magic. It is also kind of designed to emulate a lot of the themes and storylines that you see in video games, especially older Japanese video games and newer American video games that have been created to kind of also emulate those same styles. So things like Final Fantasy, things like Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest.
There's a lot of Octopath, intentionally or not. There's a lot of Octopath Traveler in there.
Yeah, there is a lot of that. I think that's intentional from Chant. And you see a lot of the kind of thing that it's like there are people in the world who are doing whatever they're doing. There are only so many people who can solve the world's problems or go out and adventure. And you are kind of the people who have that power, have that ability, and it will be up to you. But, much like Legend of Zelda games, you're not going to be alone. Even your party is not going to be alone. You're going to meet allies along the way. You may fight somebody one day and then befriend them the next. It is very what is this but a a world where everyone is having struggles and problems. Everyone needs your help, and you are there to kind of do that helpful thing for them.
I know something we spoke about when when I was writing it, when I read your outline, Danielle, was this idea of a fantasy Cold War turning hot.
Yes.
Could you explain how do the demons, these summons, guardian forces, call them what you like, but they're demons in our game,
Yes.
play into that?
So the demons are these kind of creatures that metaphysically they come from a plane outside of existence, and they have people have always had kind of this place that we call outlands, where the outside world kind of meshes with the rest of the world and creates these kind of chaotic environments. At some point, someone discovered that they could either they discovered it naturally forming, because they do form naturally, but they also discovered that they could open gates between our world and what is called the void. It's called the void because when they look through portals, it's literally just blackness beyond. And it causes kind of bad things to happen in the area that they open in. And these demons come out of it. And at first people thought, oh, it's just big monsters, but they are not. They're just entities that have kind of created a civilization, a whatever you want to call it, over time in a very different path than people have. And so everything about them is completely alien.
Alien entities.
Alien entities. And those alien entities are kind of the impetus for the biggest struggle in At the Gates, which is that the people who first discovered that they could, you know, kind of interact with, make deals with, have whatever you want to call, you know, pacts with these entities, they're very first discovered this and honestly did not treat them well, learned how to summon them and used one of them to flatten an entire mountain. So that they could invade their neighbor, who also has, where this thing was found, by the way, their neighboring nation is where they found this thing. And when they found it, it was well, it was, they want more of them. So they're going to they need to invade so that they can take it over, so that they can get more of them.
So there's an arms race element to At
There
the Gates,
is an arms
basically.
race element to At the Gates. There is an arms race that is essentially, hey, you know, everybody needs this, because if you don't have it, you're going to be behind.
Yeah. And Michaela, you worked on a lot of these creatures that may be deployed into the field, as it were,
Yeah.
on adventures and in wars. What can you tell us about them?
Well, yes, just as the word below, I also wrote all the creatures in At the Gates. They're all my babies. So you have demons, as we mentioned, every demon, some are more on the beast side of things, but none of them is not a sentient creature. Every one of them has a morality that clashes from an existence into the void to coming into the world of At the Gates. So they're all people in a sense, even if they're alien people, and they range in power from small but still relevant spirit that can give you an advantage on the on any in any context into stronger creatures, some like angels made of crystals and all that, up into something that it's not in the world below, but it's very much in the gates. The very proper deities of among demons. I had the pleasure of writing 8. Well, we call them sovereigns, and it's a name I think it's very cool. But to give an example, it's your guardian forces, your summons, your eidolons, and so you have 8 of them, 8 gods with their personality and vibes and all that.
Yep.
They just destroy reality and rework it around them to. And you can summon them. You can summon everything from the smaller ones and into the stronger ones, into these gods, and everything comes with the. Whereas normal creatures of fantasy in At the Gates have their powers and all that, demons give you an access to a portion of their power that you can tap into just as the demon is there, but you can also you become imbued with some of the demon's power regardless of the demon's level, so to say. And
Right.
so you can sort of become like them, or empower their abilities as they fight alongside you, and that's a fun mechanic, I think, because depending on who you summon, you get different tactical and also narrative beats to use.
Yes.
And Rich, obviously this game appealed to you because you approved it. What is it about At the Gates that made you think this fits in with the Earthbane cycle? It was basically that made it a game that you wanted us to push ahead with.
Well, I mean, I think it has a very different overall feel from World Below, and I wanted to contrast. There's even a kind of a contrast with us using darks and blacks of the way that World Below looks, with a lot of white and a lot of brighter colors for At the Gates. And it was a very interesting take on how to actually have the arms race. I mean, like, I see that as the background element. Like,
Yeah.
that's way back. You're not thinking. I mean, obviously people can have campaigns where you're influencing that or you're trying to do something like that, but also the idea that there's a lot of misunderstood things that you are learning as your character is learning going through that. And I think
Right.
that kind of growth is very interesting. It's similar to what goes on in the World Below, where you're having to, figure out what you can do to survive. But in this case, this is actually getting the same place, but is it's a little bit more of a I don't know, I don't want to say a spiritual growth, but an empathic growth.
Yeah.
Say, where you will eventually realize that this particular demon that you are working with isn't a monster, isn't
Right.
evil per se.
Right.
There's it's not that. It is something that has a different way of viewing reality,
Right.
and you can actually get it with some of them, get into a situation where that you're working together. Now that's
Yeah.
that's the development cycle of where this thing could go. So it was a great beginning for a world starting to understand that there's more about itself than just the things that are weighing it down, like all the political countries fighting against each other and stuff like that.
Right.
So,
Those are those are all background elements of like, here's what starts your story.
and meanwhile, because it's inspired by JRPGs, I'm picturing some guy with a sword kicking over baskets to try to find an extra heart. And,
Of course.
And when he gets particularly powerful, kicking over towers to find a monster.
Rupees.
Yeah, there you go. So I just thought there was a lot of different takes on, hey, let's do a cool fantasy thing, and that was what I really liked, the difference between it. And on the other hand, it is very possible that with all of this growth that's happening to the characters and stuff like that, the real movers and shakers don't get any of that and are smashing the world up by sending these demons against each other, who wittingly or unwittingly exert so much destruction that the place gets destroyed.
Yeah.
Right.
The whole world could die.
And I mean, for me, it feels very much like the damage you can do with magic in At the Gates is existential, as you say. I think in the World Below, it is almost more Well, it's retaliatory, hence chaotic retaliations existing in the world below. The repercussions of your actions are often bounced directly back on you in the world
Right.
below, or the people you care about. Out the Gates has a more environmental theme in the
Yes.
sense that you can screw up the world around you in a broad fashion,
Yes.
and you may not feel the effects of that, but your descendants will.
Mm-hmm.
Or you may completely level an entire entire village accidentally because you were in the fight with somebody who was, you know, you needed to summon a demon against, and
Yeah.
it went awry, or you don't realize that the demon ended up, blighting the land.
Mm-hmm. And just to I mentioned this for the world below quite late on as well, but if At the Gates is interesting to you, and I hope it is, as I mentioned, the backer kit campaign for that wrapped up not like that long ago. I
Literally
don't know
like
if
last 2 weeks ago.
pre-orders. Yes, I don't think the pre-orders are open yet on backer
No.
kit.
Not yet.
But they will be soon, and if this is of interest to you, please do check out the At the Gates Ash Can, which is available on Drive-Thru RPG. It will give you a narrow slice of what At the Gates can do, what the system
Yes.
works like, what your characters might look like, and the kind of adventures they might embark upon. And
Yes.
Danielle, I'd like to, because I finished by talking about the characters you can play with the world below. Let's talk about the characters you can play in At the Gates.
Sure. You can play kind of your main path is what profession you are, and your profession is kind of the role that you play in the group, and also like the things that you've learned on how to deal with the world and things like that. So there's 5 main professions right now, which are the diviner, who is your kind of your healer and your spiritual person. There are the harriers, who are your kind of spies and forward scouts. There are the mages, who while everybody has magic, these people study magic, and they study kind of the relationship between people and magic. And then you have warlords, who are kind of your politicians, your leaders, and your tactical fighters. They're very protective of their party members. They're kind of the tank of the group. And then you have your warriors, who are straight up fighters and weapon masters. And they have a little every profession has a little dabble into other things. So, warriors can kind of take on a tank role. They can also kind of take on a leadership role. They have those kind of capabilities, and all the characters have special training that they kind of can access at any time without like rest, I guess is the best way to put that. And these are fueled by momentum for the most part. And then the other thing is fifth. I was going to say practices, but that's not correct. It's pillars, and the pillars are the thing in your world that is the magic and how you express magic itself. So yeah, those are the things you use to interact with the world, and then that is the way that you deal with that.
Yeah. No, that's the way you deal with adversity. It's the way you
Yeah.
overcome your challenges and embark upon adventures, and the way you make your characters heroes.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that is particularly striking to me as one of the writers on At the Gates. It's that your characters do feel like big damn heroes, to steal a phrase. Your characters can do amazing things, perform immense feats, whether as combatants, as spellcasters, and there is so much in that world to interact with in the form of setting. It feels very different to the world below, but it is still part of the Earthbane Cycle. So the two games are in some ways connected in ways that will steadily, I hope, become more apparent. But there are certain things that we will be, of course, teasing throughout the various games of the Earthbane cycle that you, the readers, the players, need to pick up on.
Yes.
It will never be the case that we will require you play one game or read one game in order to understand another, and you will
No.
never be missing out by not picking up all the games. As much as we want you to pick up all the games, if there is a game that speaks more to you than another, play the game that appeals. But you may find the experience even more rewarding if you can see where the threads become entangled, to use a Curseborn phrase.
Uh-oh. You said the word.
Oh no,
You
Curseborn, the
did.
panel's gonna
Now we're
collapse
gonna.
just before we talk about Monster Kingdoms. So actually now is a very good time to talk about Monster Kingdoms, because we've been doing this
Yeah.
for just over 40 minutes now. So anyone who's been hanging on waiting to listen to me talk about this new game, thank you so much for your patience. Monster Kingdoms is still very much in a formative stage. I have written a world bible for it. Rich is happy with that. I've worked on it with Mr. Eddie Webb, and it is formally part of the Earthbane Cycle. In Monster Kingdoms, your characters, or I should say, the world, is a point where the Age of Heroes is well and truly over. It has been over for several centuries, and the Age of Villainy has begun. Well, that should be the opening to a movie, shouldn't it?
Yes.
In a world
Bum,
where
bum, 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 bum,
In
bum,
a
bum, bum, bum,
world,
bum.
in a world where all the heroes are dead or dying. You're living in a world that has been divided up by the eponymous monster kingdoms. Now, this isn't a bunch of homogenous groups. They are divided along philosophy. Sometimes they're divided along racial or speciest lines, but for the most part, it is they follow leaders that appeal to them. And this is a very much a fractured world. It was held together by one means or other by this empire in the center, the Nathira Empire, which, in a sort of Roman come Venetian fashion, uh, basically spread its tentacles through all of these kingdoms via roads. Now, in the past, they enforced a peace, a pax Nathira, if you like, through war, through arms. By the time our game is taking place, it is more through trade, hence sort of Roman to Venetian. They basically control the mercantilism, and they basically also provide the weapons, the armor, the technology, and the magic that everyone else is using to kick seven bells out of each other. Your characters are monsters. Your characters are not gleaming heroes with shining armor. This doesn't mean your characters are beyond redemption. This doesn't mean your characters have to be edgy. Indeed, this is something that I wrote about in the game Bible and something I've discussed with Eddie and Rich. It's that question of how to play darkness without being edgy. This isn't a game where you're supposed to outgross each other. It's a game where the world has been overrun by monsters. Sauron won. The forces of light were crushed. You live in the remnants, but that doesn't mean you don't want to live a good life. That doesn't mean you don't aspire to something better than your neighbors. And it doesn't mean you're not prone to the same exceptionalisms, the same kind of the hatreds that may be encouraged in your cultures as your neighbors too. So it's quite a complex game in the sense that there's a lot of darkness that's floating around out there, and you're going to be attached to some of it, but not necessarily all of it. We've mentioned recently to each other taking certain inspirations from certain anime, for instance, in the way of how violence is, let's say, projected, how it is interpreted, how wars and attacks and magic and so on comes across as grandiose and destructive. It is something that is I guess, the tales of epics. And our characters and our respective kingdoms, we have kingdoms that are predominantly undead. We have kingdoms that are predominantly, well, there's some of these things that you're going to see quite closely connected to some of our other games. There is a kingdom of rot. There's the kingdom of the malignant mind, which I'm very fond of. And they all have their own ideas, but your characters can be monsters from any of these kingdoms bound together. It is a game that leans quite heavily on the Story Path Ultra idea of bonds. It's one of my favorite mechanics that has been enhanced, to use a Story Path term, from Story Path to Story Path Ultra. The idea that
Yes.
you are reliant upon each other. You are each other's bondsman, if you like. And with that in mind, in a very hostile world, you are the only people that each of you can depend on. And despite the fact it is a world that has in many ways fallen to ruin, there is hope and there is adventure. There's mystery. And what may come out of the screwed up nature of some of these monster kingdoms is a future where people aren't constantly fighting, aren't constantly destroying each other. You could be at the forefront of building the next world, the world that isn't pure cataclysm. Now, some of you may be able to see that, again, there's some DNA that is shared from the world below to At the Gates to Monster Kingdoms. We are looking at, I don't know whether you want to call it apocalyptic thinking, but it's, or eschatological thinking, through
Eschatological?
eschatological
Em
What is
thinking.
that even? What is
I'm
that like?
shitifying it, you mean?
Is
I'll
that
let
like
people
NC
look.
Escher
I'll let people look eschatological up.
Pertaining to the apocalypse.
Yes, thank you very much, Michele. Eschatology. It is the study of the end of the world, and every single one of these Earthbane games has an eschatological theme. And Monster Kingdoms is one where the war is already taking place. These people don't like each other.
Right.
But there is room to venture into dungeons. There's room to seize magical powers. There is room to make something of yourself and carve a kingdom out of your own. Build kingdoms within these monster kingdoms. So, right now, it's
That's
all
pretty damn powerful to do it, but there you go.
Yeah, yeah. You may be able to with your powers that are right now divided between scepters, crowns, and orbs. These things might differ as the game goes on, but and anything I'm saying right now may not survive contact with a page, but that is often the way with games we've just announced.
Yes.
So there's so much I could talk about Monster Kingdoms, but I think as we've got 10 minutes left, we should go over to Q&A.
Absolutely.
And if people
Cue
have got,
that A-ing, or
yes,
A that
if people have
queuing.
got Monster Kingdom specific questions, by all means you can ask. But I think there's already questions about various games. So
Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm going to answer this first question, then I'm going to cast it to you, Michele, because you know the world below very well, and ask which one you would worship. Nicholas asks, what religion is ascendant in your world below game as of your current session, Matthew? That's a very good question, because Fortuna had a massive temple in the settlement I was playing in, and it turned out that the Holy of Fortuna was basically hoarding grain, effectively saying, I'm the only person who could be trusted with all of this because I'm the wisest person here. And it turned out that the other people in the settlement weren't all that keen.
Was in fact unwise.
Yes, and so this person was exiled in the middle of a chaos storm. That tends to go very badly. And
Sure does.
obviously lots of dogmas were vying for primacy, but one of the player characters, who was also a worshipper of Fortuna, basically said, the temple still stands, I will step up and I will rehabilitate my goddess in the eyes of your settlement. So we'll see how well that works.
I'll put aside my own cares and things, and I'll step forward. If someone must. It should be me.
Exactly. I am the most fortunate here. And how about you, Michele? Which dogma speaks to you? If you had a settlement in the world below, which dogma would you adopt?
I'll leave you with a curveball, because I think I personally try to do our own thing and not get affiliated with anything going on where someone would makes decision for settlements in the world below. To be honest.
Yeah.
Because they tend to bring trouble in, and things are already troublesome down there.
Yeah, trust the guilds. The guilds are where you should place your trust. They have all the information. All right, so this is a question to everyone who has an answer. Starting with you, Danielle. What is your favorite demon from At the Gates?
Oh man. That's so hard. So I really like them all, but I think Sakala the Dustbringer is my favorite just because I have built lore around them.
Okay, and how about you, Michele?
If we're going sovereigns, I'll probably go with Zoaki because it's just a giant fire-breathing snake. But I'm very fond of the Aglomp in the smaller
I
ones.
love the Eglomp. They are
Which is-
very imp-like, which I
Yeah, there are frog, fish, round, cute, easy thing that can devour giants. Like we just sort of the sound I imagine is sort of like from the name because there you go, just Aglomp and swallow. That's
Rich,
where the name comes from.
Rich, do you know any of them by name or
Absolutely not.
Okay. Well,
Do not know them by name, and also I'm not doing favorites. I told you that.
No, that's true. We've done this ever since you were first asked what's your favorite clan, and it's obviously the McGregors. My favorite demon is the Nightmare Lanterns, which are by no means the most powerful. I think they're elites like the I think Aglomps are elites as well. And the reason I like Nightmare Lanterns is a couple of reasons. One, they really feel like Elden Ring summons to me, and I really enjoy Elden Ring. I think it's a fantastic game. Plus, well, with the jellyfish idea, but I also love the idea that they are born of everyone's fears. They are creatures of nightmare. They are thoroughly unreasonable. And if you are deploying them against your enemy, you are really dealing some psychological hell.
Yeah, so demons help, others are war crimes from the start.
Yes. Danielle, what 3 things from Out the Gates would you stress to convince players to play this game?
Ooh, it is it has a depth of lore that draws you in, but the space to build your own games in. So the system allows you to play any kind of game you want to play. If you want to play it politically, if you want to play it exploratory, if you want to play it combat oriented, you can do any of those. And also, if you like JRPGs or other RPG games and want to create a world or a game that has that same epic feel and that same choices matter, and you're kind of ushering a new age of the world along or things like that, then this is a great place to do it.
I think that is excellent. That's a great sales spiel. Thank you, Danielle. There was another question for you, and you don't have to answer it because the key word here is hidden. Are there Scarred Lands references hidden in At the Gates?
I'm not answering that.
Because they would be hidden.
That's an excellent answer, I think.
We've been asked why Cycle is called Earthbane, or why the cycle is called Earthbane. Is it Bane of our Earth? Now, some of this is, again, it's connective tissue that you have to pick up on as the readers. The one thing I will say is it is, in theory, I mean, in both games so far, it is quite possible to pass between the world below and At the Gates. Chaos portals exist in the world below. Similar devices exist in At the Gates. And doing so, you are not necessarily time traveling.
No.
So, next question.
Yeah.
Next question. At the Gates avoids the stereotypical fantasy RPG approach to races and heritages, which is something I love. Danielle. Currently, the available information is quite vague intentionally. Will we get a bit more information about physiology and common versus less common physical expressions, along with any indication of any national distribution of these types of commonality?
No.
All right. No, that's fair. I mean, we've got something similar going on in the world below. We've tried to have ancestries be more akin to adopted cultures.
Yep.
You do not have to be biologically connected to a hobgob to be considered a hobgob, because frankly, the world in the world below is beyond that kind of, I guess, ethnocentrism.
Yes.
If you like, but that's not to say there aren't certain cultural traits that are expressed more commonly than others, and
some cultures do clash. That's
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and the same can definitely be said for Out the Gates. This is part of the reason why some of the kingdoms, not just kingdoms, of course, we've got various political systems in Out the Gates, are at war with each other or very close to it.
Yes.
I've got a question here. Since I mentioned Sauron, which player character in Monster Kingdoms, I'll say antagonist in Monster Kingdoms, most resembles the Tolkien antagonist? That's a very good question. I think I'm often going to defer to at least in its current form, the Malignant Mind is a pretty nasty individual by virtue of its name. No one outside of the Kingdom of the Malignant Mind likes the Malignant Mind, and the people in the Malignant Mind don't know enough at this point to actually like or dislike anything. They just serve the Malignant Mind. But more central to the Nathera Empire, you have the triumvirate siblings, more or less, of Fire, the Black, Dismay, the Unholy, and Sulphurous Wild Soul, who are essentially the regime leaders vying for power. Monster Kingdoms has deliberately a Song of Ice and Fire, Wars of the Roses. In fact, game I've got up there, Paladin, which the late great Stu Wick worked on, and Jennifer Wick art directed, I think, or laid out. It's a brilliant game. I know we shouldn't necessarily promote games not by Onyx Path, but it is a fantastic game. And
Fuck it, we're doing it.
Yeah, but it's one of the last games Stu worked on. I know that, and it is just wonderful. And that idea of there is no right or wrong monarch, let's say. If you're looking at an autocracy and saying, well, I'm putting my money on that one, you're still going to end up with an autocracy. So they're all different shades of shit. And the three that you are stuck with at the time of the Triumvirate, which is where Monster Kingdoms it takes place right now,
which is the most
nice.
unstable political structure. So
yes, the empire is collapsing. What are you going to do about it? And Tom Murr says, is Monster Kingdoms the calm season on steroids? No, there is no chaos storm raging around the Monster Kingdoms, shape-shifting people, destroying people where they stand, disintegrating people. That would make the game a little too hostile, I think. But there's certainly elements of it. There's certainly chaotic elements, because what would life be without a little chaos?
Yes.
And okay, last question is, what is the Monster Kingdom Empire called? It is Nithera, which is Nithera. There is a reason for that, and it is currently written up, and I'm not going to be expressing it on here.
Plus, time's up.
Yeah, time is up. But thank you so much, everybody, for watching this live. Thank you so much for your questions. And I do hope, because we've expressed in many of our panels, we would love for you to rate and review our games. We're going to keep expressing that because it's one of our big driving motivators in this convention. We want people to head on over to DriveThru, onto RPGNet, wherever, and let people know about the games you like. It makes our games sell, and that's very important for us to make more games. In this case, we have At the Gates, we have The World Below. Both of them are available in Ashcan version. You can leave ratings for them on DriveThru RPG, and that will lead to more people backing them.
Right.
And Beyond that, share the links to the backer kit campaigns. In the case of the World Below, people can still pre-order it. In the case of Out the Gates, they can be notified for when they can pre-order it.
Yes.
Will happen soon.
Yes, it will happen very, very soon, within the next couple of months, certainly.
Oh, well, yeah. Next couple of
And
weeks, probably.
probably within the next couple of weeks, but I'm hedging my bets there. So beyond that, last thing, and then we will call it entirely. I just want to say thank you so much to all the very enthusiastic people who are watching this panel, because I know Onyx Path is primarily known for horror. And we
Yes.
are unashamed of that. We are very happy with our horror games, that we've done fantastic work in horror, if I do say so myself. All of us here on this panel have contributed to horror in some way or other. I remember when Danielle hired me to work on Vampire the Requiem, and I loved working with her as a developer. I remember working with Michele on Mummy the Curse, and that was just so wonderful to get to know Michele like that and get to know Michele's work. And Rich, of course, was with White Wolf from pretty much the very beginning.
Yes.
And people can credit the vision of that game that they love so well in many ways to Rich.
Well, the visuals.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, visuals. We'll quibble. So coming here and enjoying a fantasy panel and loving our fantasy games and wanting to get to know them is a huge boost to us.
Very much
Please
appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah, please support our games, whatever shades they come in. If you're interested in them, share them. But anyway, with all that said, we should call this a panel. So thanks
Many
so
worlds,
much,
one
everybody.
Earthbane.
Yes, indeed. What many Banes, one Earth.
One.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes. Thanks.
Hello, everyone.